AP Statistics. In this video, we are going to talk about Unit 1 as an intro to what statistics is and the difference between categorical and quantitative data. So as you can see, I've got the notes here, everything's filled out. I'm just going to kind of give you an overview and remind you that statistics actually is often more of a science than it is a math. Now, that being said, it doesn't mean we're not going to do math. It's more about how we gather data and analyzing that data than actually coming up with a lot of calculations. We will come up with some calculations and use those, but that's not really what we center the whole thing on. Okay, so as we're looking at collecting data, we're always going to be collecting data about some type of individual. It's going to be an object, it's going to be a set of objects that we're collecting a set of data on, animals, things, all types of, people, etc., etc. When we talk about a variable is just an attribute that can take on our different values for different individuals. For instance, if I were to gather data on the class and I had you fill out a survey and I ask you your favorite color and your height and your pulse, each of those items that I'm asking a question about, I'm asking for data, each of those is considered a variable. So if I'm asking everyone about their height, height is a variable. If I'm asking about your favorite color is a variable. Once we gather our data, we're then going to look at this idea of, okay, is the variable that I questioned you about categorical or is it quantitative? Now, generally speaking, you can think of these as one of them is numeric and one of them is not. However, in categorical variables, we can have numeric values, so we have to be careful with this. Now, something to remember about quantitative variables, they are always numerical, always numerical, okay? So categorical can be numerical, but it doesn't have to be. Big difference here. For instance, if you got a categorical variable that's numeric, let's say your zip code, okay? Well, your zip code, rather than the number that is your zip code being a value that is associated with you as an individual, as a measure, actually your zip code's just a category you fit into based on where your home is. So see how that's a numeric value, but it's a category rather than a specific measure of something about you. Quantitative is always a measure. In fact, if you've got numeric data and you're not sure if it's categorical or quantitative, ask yourself this question. Does it make sense to say take the average of the numbers? So does it make sense to average the numbers? Because see, it makes sense to say something like, well, what's the average height of people in your classroom? That makes perfect sense. But does it make sense to say the average zip code is? No, that doesn't make any sense. So that's a good way to ask yourself if you're confronted with numeric data. All right, so moving on. So as we talk about quantitative variables, we have two types of quantitative variables. They can be discrete or they can be continuous. Well, what's the difference? Well, a discrete means it's going to have a fixed set of possible values. So how many books did you read last year? That would be a discrete variable. But if you're looking at something like continuous, it can take on any value on the number line. So if I were to ask you, well, how much time do you spend reading every day? Well, that's going to be maybe 30 minutes and 45 seconds, or an hour and 10 minutes, something like that. All the values on the number line are up for grabs there. It's not just like 1, 2, 3, etc., 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 etc. Discrete, another way to think about discrete, these are countable values, okay? So they're going to be whole numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, etc., etc. Okay, the distribution of a variable. We're going to talk more about this in another video, but suffice it to say for now that if you hear me say the word distribution, I'm talking about a graph. I want a visual of the mathematical or just categorical values that I've given you. All right, so as we look at just looking about thinking about the difference between categorical and quantitative. Of course, since categorical and quantitative data are different, they're going to have different ways that we construct their distributions. So as we look through this here, you've got types of graphs for categorical and you've got types of graphs for quantitative. The only one they share is a dot plot. Okay, everything else is different. So we're going to explore these ideas in other videos.